a junior in high school in 1991 when one of my friends, my high school friends, we're still friends to this day, his mom handed me this magazine and said, "Bobby, I know you really like the Bible and you're thinking about going into ministry. I think you'd really like this article I just read." So she handed me this copy of U.S. News and World Report, and I was completely fascinated about the Dead Sea Scrolls, particularly growing up here in Southern California. I was fascinated with how much here in Southern California played a role in Dead Sea Scrolls research, particularly if any of you know the Huntington Library in San Marino, California. In 1991, they were one of the places in the world where you could go to study Dead Sea Scrolls. So as a junior in high school, I started thinking about Hebrew language, Dead Sea Scrolls, Hebrew Bible, and that started opening up various doors when it came to what I would do. So I did go to college at a place called Multnomah, training for ministry in Portland, Oregon. But it was during my senior year there that someone presented a lecture on the minister from the 18th century, founder of Wesleyanism and Methodism, John Wesley, and he gave this address to the clergy. And at that time, I had done a lot of Greek study, I'd done a lot of biblical study, but I had not done any language study when it came to Hebrew. So let me just read this quote to you because you can see how it says here, "Do I understand Greek and Hebrew? Otherwise, how can I undertake, as every minister does, not only to explain books which are written therein, but to defend them against all opponents? Am I not at the mercy of everyone who does understand or even pretends to understand the original? For which way can I confute his pretense? Do I understand the language of the Old Testament critically at all? Can I read in English one of David's Psalms or even the first chapter of Genesis? Do I understand the language of the New Testament? Am I a critical master of it? Have I enough of it even to read in English the first chapter of St. Luke? If not, how many years did I spend at school? How many at the university? And what was I doing all those years? I'm not ashamed to cover my face." Obviously, John Wesley was a pretty intense guy, but because this quote really inspired me to go to Jerusalem and study Hebrew, when I came to APU and realized we had a statue of John Wesley on our campus, I said, this is a place for me. This is where I can feel home. So I will give a challenge to Drew right now that any of the students on this call, when they need to get a selfie of John Wesley, which is on West Campus. But from this one quote, I went to Jerusalem, and from there, other opportunities opened up, particularly in the year 2000, when I got to spend a year at Hebrew University doing nothing but studying Dead Sea Scrolls, and it was a fantastic year. So you never know how your life is going to be changed, how you are going to be impacted just by something simple like a magazine or by a quote from someone like John Wesley. For all of you here tonight, I'm sure you are sitting there thinking about what is it about ministry, biblical studies, philosophy, theology that I should know as I am starting to move this direction as a high school junior, senior, thinking about coming to APU next year. So I thought it would help if I give you a little background into the different majors we have in the School of Theology. Because many of you, you may be interested in ministry is what you're saying, but you're really more interested in theology or biblical studies. So let me share from our webpage, and I'm going to just use our APU webpage because it's a good place for you to be able to go back to look into these different programs. But we have 6 majors that we have in the undergraduate School of Theology. The first one, as you can see here, is the Biblical Studies major. We'll learn a little bit more about that in a minute from Dr. Mullins. We have our Christian Ministries major, and I'm actually going to scroll down to the bottom to our Youth and Family Ministry majors because these 2 majors are housed in what we call our Practical Theology department. We then have our Interdisciplinary Studies major, which is also in our Practical Theology department. And this year is the first year it's fully in the School of Theology, but it is a way for you to take theology, Bible, philosophy, any of these, but also do 12 units in psychology, 12 units in Bible, 12 units in theology, and then they graduate with a 36-unit major in interdisciplinary studies. We also have our philosophy major, and one of our 2 of our key areas of our philosophy majors and our faculty in philosophy are in the areas of ethics and the areas of apologetics. So if you're interested in any of those, the philosophy major is one for you to consider. Our theology major, which Drew already mentioned, this was his major when he was an undergrad student at APU. And the theology major focuses a lot on kind of the history of interpretation, the history of the church, and all the various kind of theological doctrines throughout the history of the church in the last 2,000 years. And then I've already mentioned our youth and family ministry major. And that one, along with our Christian ministries, is really focused on getting people prepared who already know very clearly that they are. One more kind of program that we have in the School of Theology for any of you that are looking at ministry as your major focus. We have a program that is hosted by our Center for Vocational Ministry. We call it the Vocare program. As you see here, it's a 5-year bachelor's to master's in pastoral studies program, or a 6-year bachelor's to a master's of divinity program. We've worked it out with the curriculum so that for many of our theology, School of Theology majors, whether biblical studies, Christian ministries, youth ministries, you can take what would take you normally 7 years, you can do in 6 if it's a master's of divinity, or you can do it in 5 if you want to get a master's of arts in pastoral studies, just by intentional advising and by using advanced standing and some other things that we have the opportunity. What I love about our Vocare program is they have a limited amount of students that they admit into the program every year, and they have intentional 4 years of mentoring to really get you to think about your strengths, maybe even some of your weaknesses, and what are some things you need to be considering as you are looking into a life in the ministry as a minister of the gospel. So as I think of our different programs, we have our various majors that all have different emphases, but then we also have some of these unique mentoring programs to help all of you that are considering a life of ministry. I will say that all of our majors, whether it's philosophy or theology or biblical studies, we have a very, very good track record for students to go on to our own graduate programs at Apu Seminary or to other graduate programs throughout the country. So it is not unusual for us to have a graduating class that well over half of them go into graduate school and have significant funding that they are given because of the training they have received in the undergrad. Recently, are talking about what are some of the other undergraduate programs in the country that we can think of as, say, either aspirational or ones that we would like to say, hey, that's a good model for us to follow. And Dr. Mullins and I both agreed that in a lot of ways, the programs that we've created in all of these degrees, but particularly in biblical studies, are what other universities are aspiring to be. We have an amazing group of 400 level classes and 300 level classes, language classes. So over the last 15 years that I've been at APU, I've been able to teach Hebrew, Aramaic. I taught a Ugaritic section of a class 1 year. I've taught Syriac to students, and then we have all the other Greek and Latin courses that are there too. So really, APU is a place that if you're thinking Bible, theology, ministry, you can create an incredible undergraduate experience by our various programs. So to tell you a little bit more about one of these disciplines, biblical studies, and to tell you about exciting opportunities that you can even do study abroad as we think getting past COVID-19 in the future, because during your time at APU, when we're back on campus, you will have the opportunity to do travel. And for biblical or other School of Theology majors, being able to go to the Holy Land and see and walk the Bible is a significant thing. So Dr. Mullins, I turn it over to you.
Okay. So, okay, there we go. All right. All right. Hello, everyone. So I just want to just take a few moments just to emphasize biblical studies and why major in biblical studies. And one reason is, as Bobby's already alluded to, you have the opportunity to learn the Bible in the original language, whether that be Hebrew, Greek, even Latin, or all of them. And so you take a text like this, by the time you finish your language studies, you'll be able to read this passage, which is actually the theme passage of APU from Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for your well-being and not to do harm, plans for a future and hope. And I should mention that all students at APU, all majors, must complete 1 year of a modern language. And Hebrew and Greek and Latin all qualify for that 1 year of language. So it's a good way to really get yourself into the biblical text in the original languages. Bobby already alluded to the fact that APU, our department, is really the kind of department that most schools are departments in undergraduate biblical and religious studies in the US. We have 14 full-time professors with PhD degrees, and we have 15 adjunct professors. We all have our own specialty. This is one of the advantages of coming to a school with so many professors, because you can basically pick the professor that has an emphasis in the area that you're interested in studying. Now, just to give you an idea of what we offer, we used to have a religious studies major. We don't have that anymore. So our only major is in biblical studies. You can also double major in biblical studies and theology, and you can also double major in biblical studies and Christian ministries or youth ministry. We also have 3 minors. We have a minor in ancient languages. We have one in biblical studies, and besides the biblical studies minor, if you become a biblical studies major, you're not going to be minoring in biblical studies, of course, although you can in ancient languages or religious studies. But for all other majors, you can minor in biblical studies. So if you choose theology, you choose philosophy, you can minor in biblical studies. And what's so nice about the biblical studies minor is that all students, regardless of major, have to take 3 Bible classes, 2 lower division classes and 1 upper division. Just add 3 more upper division classes and you've got your minor in biblical studies. So it's something we really encourage our students university-wide to consider. In addition to the minors, we have 2 concentrations within the biblical studies major, 18 for the minor. And the 2 concentrations we have is in biblical archaeology, where you take 2 courses on the APU campus, and then 2 courses in our study away program when we go overseas. And so I'll be talking about that when we get to the end of our talk. But if you join us on our study tour of Israel and stay on for the dig afterwards, you've already completed half of the concentration in biblical archaeology. We also have a concentration in biblical hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is just a fancy word for interpretation. And a lot of what students do with the hermeneutics concentration is really look more deeply at the Bible, and especially looking at the Bible from different perspectives globally. And so students are very, very energized by this hermeneutics aspect. You can also opt as a biblical studies major for what we call the Certificate of Distinction in Biblical Studies. All you have to do is to maintain a 3.5 GPA throughout your 4 years of study. It's I think 2.0, I think, for just the BA in Biblical Studies. But if you want the Certificate of Distinction, you have to maintain the 3.5, do 1 upper division Greek or Hebrew course, and then choose any 5 of the 400 level courses that we offer in the department, and you have the Certificate of Distinction. And it just gives you that little extra edge. If you want to apply to grad school somewhere, you want to apply to Yale or Emory or Duke or some of these schools, having that certificate of distinction really makes you stand out. And then finally, I just want to link you into what Bobby alluded to. And these are opportunities to continue on at APS, this is Pacific Seminary, into a master's program, whether that be the MA or whether it be the MDiv, just by starting off in biblical studies and then continuing on in the seminary. So let me just kind of wrap things up with the summer opportunities. We have both a study away, which involves a study tour of biblical lands. And in 2018, we did Greece and Rome. We will be doing Israel in 2022. And so it involves a 2-week study tour. You get credit for that, UBBL 350, Biblical Lands and Cultures. Most of our upper division 300 level classes require the lower division classes as a prerequisite, but that has been waived with this class. So that means if you have the opportunity to travel to Israel in 2022 and you've not yet taken Exodus, Deuteronomy, or Luke, Acts, those lower division courses, you can still take this class. And it will fulfill that 300 level upper division Bible requirement for general education. So that's university-wide. So, so this is really a great way to see Israel, see other biblical lands, and get that upper division Bible requirement out of the way. And if you stay for another 2 weeks after the study tour and you participated on the archaeological dig, you also get upper division credit for that as well. And we do Israel every summer. We dig in Israel. APU has its own archaeological dig in Israel. In fact, the man that you see here, this head of this man, we found in a building at our archaeological site. We don't know the identity of this person, but he could be someone like King Ahab, maybe King Hazael of Aram Damascus, important figures mentioned in the Bible. And so that's it. So these are just a couple of other opportunities that you have. And again, as I mentioned earlier, you do these 2 courses as a part of this summer opportunity, you've already completed half of the biblical archaeology concentration. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of students visiting Israel, here you can see a group of us in front of the Dome of the Rock. And also here you can see another group with the Sea of Galilee in the background. We evenly touch on both Old and New Testament sites. And here we have a fellow actually working a flour mill, one of these hand mills, actually mentioned in the Bible. And the dig itself, this just gives you an idea of what the city would have looked like in the time of Abraham. And we have our students involved on this dig, you know, taking on various leadership roles. And this past summer, we even had our own mass that kept us safe out in the field. And so with that, I'll draw things to a close. Yes, let me just point out the nice discovery from this past summer is a stone cylinder that had some reliefs etched onto that. And when it's rolled out, it shows, you can see here, a figure, Simeon, moon god scene, and an altar. And so very, very nice biblical scene dating to around the time of King Josiah in biblical times. Okay, so with that, I will end the show.
All right. I hope it's all right, but I wanted to I'm dropping a link in the chat for everyone right now. All panels and attendees. So we talk about archaeology, and Dr. Mullins is very humble, but we talk about archaeology, and that the depiction of that head That was ranked the number 2 discovery for 2018, biblical discovery in archaeology. So when we say that you are in the field, like you are legitimately interacting with history and making history at the same time in what you're doing. I just came up with that. That was a pretty good turn of phrase. But so you get the opportunity, and it's one of my probably biggest regrets. One is not minoring in biblical studies, because I could have and should have. And the second is not attending an archaeological dig while I was a student at APU. It still just astounds me that, and this is beyond me working at APU and loving APU, just as a human, it astounds me that as a college student between 18 and 22, like we get the opportunity to learn in ways that are actually like, this isn't a practice dig, this is a real dig. So I will now kind of transition into our question and answer time. The first question we have is kind of a little bit of a bigger one, is would you mind maybe speaking to the difference between maybe a denominational theological school of theology, and then an interdenominational one, because that can often be pretty confusing for students as they apply. Dr. Duke, if you would mind taking that away.
Sure. One of the strengths of APU is because we have many denominations represented among our faculty. We really do draw from the whole range of kind of evangelical Christian understanding. Dr. Mullins mentioned hermeneutics. One of the things that we want our students to realize and at least be very mindful of is that when you get in those conversations about theology or Bible, you can also come to a point where there's some kind of disagreement or misunderstanding. And it's very helpful to start asking yourselves those questions of, is this, say, misunderstanding or disagreement because of the different backgrounds we have? So someone who grew up in a Presbyterian background will probably look at things a little differently than we also have a lot of students at APU that come from Catholic and Orthodox background, Armenian background. And each of these traditions, very rich historical traditions in the Christian faith, give us different things to think about. And APU is a place where you can really get a very comprehensive, holistic education to really understand the whole scope of church history. Whereas at times when you go to denominationally focused schools, so maybe a school that is Baptist or just Methodist, or you can tend to get an education that is good, but it is kind of so focused on that denomination that you don't get wider exposure to the just the kind of rich heritage and beauty of the Christian faith.
That's great. Thank you very much. That was something that was new for me when I came in as a theology student, and it was actually because of APU's interdenominational school, like both the School of Theology as well as our chapels. I actually discovered through our chapels gospel worship, and then the church I ended up attending in college, all through college, was gospel church, and it was because of the interdenominational theologies, flavors, but still, and it's always important, great to stress, still within the structure of Protestant Christianity, so still within the Orthodox structure of that. My next question for Dr. Mullins is a question I often get, and we have right now, is for a student who maybe is newer to the faith, is newer to the Bible, do they need to have a really good understanding of the Bible before they enter the class in order to do well? What does that look like for someone who might be newer to the Bible as they enter their first Exo-Deep class?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. Let me say that we have, and I think partly because of our interdenominational focus, that we have students with a variety of background in Bible. Some come in, let's say, from a Christian high school, and they just have this excellent background, and other people are very new to the faith. Or maybe they grew up in a church that didn't emphasize reading of the Bible that much. And so we do acknowledge that students coming in tend to be less familiar with the Bible. So we start with the basics. And that's not only with Exodus, Deuteronomy, but also the Christian Life Faith Ministry course as well. They start with the basic. What is the Bible? What is the Old Testament? What is the New Testament? And so in Exodus, Deuteronomy, we will build on that understanding. And we do, you know, I know that the students that I have, some that are more advanced in their knowledge, will move along more quickly. Those that are less familiar with the Bible, we take the time to go through it. And to be honest with you, even those that know the Bible better don't mind the review and don't mind starting with the basics and working their way through.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. So for our students who are specifically hoping to go to graduate school afterwards, how does APU's class sizes, what does it look like to interact in the upper division levels? For example, for me, coming out of high school, I went to a public high school, so my classes were 30 students coming out of high school, and my dad is a professor at a state college where some classes are 300, 400. What does the faculty-student dynamic look like as you go through the School of Theology?
So for all, as we mentioned, for all APU undergrads, regardless of your major, you're going to take 18 units of Bible, theology, ministry, philosophy. And those classes tend to be larger, not in comparison to the state college, but those classes tend to be between 25 and 35 students. We have a couple of our Christian Life, Faith, and Ministry classes, which is our 100 level, that have been intentionally constructed to be larger, and they have breakout groups and some really fun activities that they build in there. But as you go through your major, you'll see that by the time you get to your 300 and 400 level classes in any of our School of Theology majors, you're dealing with a smaller cohort of students that really become family. They are taking a lot of classes together. You really build this sense of community. And it's not unusual, say, for our UBBL 400 level courses or even our senior seminar class to have a professor. We also have one senior seminar class that has been intentionally constructed so it is a philosophy professor and a biblical studies professor that teach it together. So there's students in philosophy and students in Bible working together, and they really talk about that intersection between philosophy, theology, and the reading of Scripture. Throughout the last, say, just 2,000 years of church history, and particularly with the rise of the Enlightenment and with the ability to study the original languages and the discovery of manuscripts, that has transformed the way the Bible is studied and read. And classes like that really give very close exposure to the faculty and to really getting into the courses. So I'm sure, Drew, since you were a theology undergrad, you know that those 400 level classes, some of those professors are people that you can still go back to today and say, can I get a reference letter for this? Or, hey, I'm reading this book. Would you mind meeting me for coffee? Not during COVID-19, maybe a Zoom. Can we Zoom and talk about this various book that I'm reading? Because one of the things that I will often point out to my dean colleagues is that any given semester, the relationships and the what we call idea scores, these are the class evaluations that are done for professors, the School of Theology faculty get incredible numbers. And even on a 5-point scale, our average among hundreds of sections is almost approaching 5 for all things like faith integration, how faculty integrated faith in the curriculum. So it is one where I am so deeply proud and just enjoy all the colleagues I get to work with in the School of Theology, and particularly our undergrad faculty and their commitment to students.
Sorry, Dr. Mullins, do you have something to share as well?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. My junior year, I remember my junior year spring semester, my largest class was 10 students. My smallest class was 3 students. At APU, we have the opportunity to do independent studies. So I found this one subject that was so specific that no college is going to offer a class in it because it was so specific. It was only 3 of us that we couldn't stop talking about it. And we found each other because we were all in theology together. And so we approached, quick shout out to Dr. Paul Bowles. We approached Dr. Bowles about teaching us this class. And so we did once every 2 weeks, we did, I think it was 3 or 4 hours together. And independent studies are opportunities for specifically those of us who end up wanting to go to grad school, who maybe are wanting to really drill down on one subject, because we want to get our master's kind of emphasizing this and potentially go on and get PhDs, doctorates in it. So yeah, that semester, my biggest class was 10. In the 4 years I was at APU, I went to 8 different professors' houses. My sophomore year of college, this is probably the story that is the closest to my heart as far as our theology department. My sophomore year of college, I began going through just college often brings about mental health journeys. And for me, I was on a journey towards OCD. I ended up getting diagnosed with OCD, and I wasn't sure what it was at that point, but I was really struggling. I'm from Oklahoma, so I was a country away from my family. And I had a theology professor who we each week would sit, we have a prayer garden on campus. Our class would sit and we read St. Augustine's Confessions together. And then after class, this professor would sit with me for an hour as much, where I would just pepper her with questions, trying to figure out, grapple with, how does the faith that I've held, if my mom could, she would have given birth to me in a church. So like, how does this faith that I've held for so long, how does it integrate into this new experience I'm having with OCD? How am I becoming a more holistic human and a better learning God in difficult seasons? And she sat with me through every single conversation, and is one of the reasons why I dream of someday being able to teach theology and being able to teach students and give back in the ways she did and Dr. Bowles did. And I have friends who talk so much about Dr. Duke and Dr. Mullins. So really, it's not a matter of finding the really good professor and sticking with them. It's finding a professor, any of our professors, that you end up relating with and just learning. So feel free, as we still have a couple more minutes, feel free to drop questions in the chat. We would love to answer them. Our next question is, outside of the archaeological digs, what other study away, study abroad programs are available for our theology students?
There are numerous programs that students can look into, particularly because we have a strong relationship with what's called the CCCU, the Council of Christian Colleges and Universities, and they have a program called the Best Semester. So there are programs all over the world, Central South America, Australia, different parts of Europe. So that's one option that our Center for Global Learning and Engagement provides. But we also have a very tight relationship with the CCCU's Oxford Study Center. It's called SCIO. It's a study of Christianity in Oxford. And you get to have a very unique Oxford experience because you are assigned kind of tutors. The way they do it there, tutors here in our American English often sounds like this is not quite a professor, but actually there, the tutors are ones who work very closely with the professors there at Oxford University. And our students who have gone on to Oxford are some of the ones that then go on, because they've been so shaped and trained by that experience, that they themselves want to continue digging and going on for master's and PhD. So Israel, Oxford, other places that you want to travel. And then an area that APU has a very tight connection, and we've sent students for decades, is South Africa. Mostly it's our health science students that do the majority of the South Africa, because they built it in so that our nursing students, community health students, public health, and others get a very hands-on experience in South Africa working with community clinics and others. But again, South Africa is also an opportunity that you can take advantage of. So we do have students every now and then that will take multiple opportunities. They will do Oxford one semester, come back for a semester, and then go to South. So APU really is a place where the books I grew up on were called choose your own adventure books. You would read a little bit and then you would choose a different page. And I mean, you really can, if you can dream it, we can probably make it happen.
Perfect. So we, one clarification I wanted to make that I forgot is when I say for our theology students, to everyone watching, so it can get a little confusing. There's the School of Theology, which oversees biblical studies students, Christian ministry students, our religious studies students, theology students. So it can get a little confusing when you say theology, and then there's also the theology major. So when I say theology students, I'm not, even though I was a theology major, so I'm not being biased towards just the theology majors. This is for everyone. So Dr. Mullins, question about the biblical studies minor. How does that pair? Is it like if a student doesn't really see themselves going into the ministry, but they just want to learn more about the Bible, can a biblical studies minor pair pretty well with our major offerings?
Yeah, because it gives you a chance to choose 3 classes that we offer in Scripture, any one that interests you, whether it be Old Testament, New Testament. So a lot of people do take the minor just because they want to be better informed about the Bible. They teach Bible studies in their church, maybe to be involved in different parachurch ministries. So being able to have that additional background. And I have to say that it's more than just reading the content of, let's say, Paul's epistle to the Corinthians. You learn a method. You learn techniques that will apply to all the different books of the Bible. And so even ones that you don't study at APU, when you graduate and you go on into whatever you do, you'll have those tools, and you'll be able to take any biblical book and just dive into it using those techniques.
I do that. From my studies, actually, I taught, it was Dr. Ross taught me how to use a commentary originally. And so now I lead Bible studies with my church. I'm going through the Old Testament right now, kind of walking people through it. And so I've learned how to look up a commentary, and also how to know what commentaries to look for, what characteristics are in each of them. And so it is the biblical studies minor, I can't stress enough how great it is for if you just want to lead Sunday school someday, and you want to be someone who knows what you believe, and also how the Bible is constructed, and the contents where, I had a professor who spoke a lot about reading on 2 levels, where we read the Bible intellectually, but also spiritually. Like learning, how do we learn about the Bible while also reading it with a sense of awe that this is a holy, like God's word. And that's what helps in this biblical studies training. Switching gears a little bit, I'd love to talk about the Christian Ministries major. So we've spoken about a lot of the research that can happen in grad school afterwards. How does Christian Ministries major specifically prepare students to go into ministry? Are there internship opportunities? Is there a requirement for that? Some of that on the ground training, what does that look like for students?
Right. For both our Christian ministry or our youth and family ministry students, their senior year is a very intentionally and rigorous year of internships. So their junior year, they have a class where they're going to be doing their internship during their senior year. And then throughout their whole senior year, they not only are interning at usually churches in and around the Azusa, Glendora, Covina area, but sometimes a little bit farther, Pasadena and others. But then they also have a class that they meet with not only a practical theology professor, but usually they'll have another professor around campus, sometimes from our psychology department, sometimes from another department, where they do a lot of debriefing, really wrestling with the different things they're experiencing at their internship site. Now, we've really constructed this internship experience to make sure that they are getting experience at very mature organizations too. So we have policies in place that a church has to be an established church for at least 8 years before we will start sending students to that location. And again, what we want it to be is somewhere that good policies themselves, because what we don't want is our students to just become extra hands at events, but we want them to really get trained in ministry. So there's very intentional relationship with the mentors at the ministry sites. So there's training that they have to do also. So when you graduate with an undergraduate degree in Christian ministries or youth and family, I mean, you are ready to start working at a church or maybe a parachurch organization. Although the major would also very much encourage you to go on for even more theological and ministerial training. And for the home team, I would say you need to come to Azusa Pacific Seminary, because if you're interested in pastoral ministry, our Center for Vocational Ministry, which is a center within the School of Theology, it is focused completely on helping you as a student thrive in ministry. So what can we do to set you up as a student so that 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, you are still a healthy minister of the gospel?
So a lot of the people attending this tonight are probably thinking about the ministry and going into the ministry. So I know this isn't specifically an undergraduate question, but would you mind just briefly touching on the difference between an MDiv and an MA, and kind of what the seminary, so we talk about going to seminary, what those different options look like at Apu Seminary?
Yep. So in our seminary at Azusa Pacific Seminary, we have 4 degrees. We have our Master's of Arts in Pastoral Studies. We have our Master's of Divinity. We have our Master's of Arts in Theological Studies. And then we have our Doctorate of Ministry. Now our MAPS, we often will call it an MDiv Light. So it really shares almost the same curriculum. So we do have students that start the MAPS and then say, I want to stay 1 additional year and get the Master's of Divinity. The reality is that some denominations require you to have an MDiv just because of their denominational connections, are somewhat kind of required to get the MDiv. We have other denominations that they want just at least a master's level of theological and ministerial training. So some students will opt for the MAPS just because of time and financial resources. But it is one that we do have a lot of scholarship opportunities. We have a program that is not only in English, but Spanish and Korean. So it is one where we have had students now and then that, though English may be their first language, they also know Spanish well enough that they will take classes back and forth between our English and Spanish just to develop in those areas. And particularly in Los Angeles here, we live in an urban environment that if you are a pastor who is bilingual, and that could be bilingual in many different combinations of languages, you'll be that much more effective as a minister.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Because for me, even when I was a senior in high school, I knew I wanted to go into ministry, but I had no clue the difference between MDivs and MAs and the route. And so it's also helpful to know that if you didn't get all of that, when you come to APU, you get an academic advisor who is a faculty member. So for example, for me, I came in as a youth and family ministries major. I was that for really 4 or 5 months, and then actually realized pretty quickly that for me, I felt in my own walk that the Lord might be sending me more into the academic theology world. And it was through my academic advisors that helped me. It was through Dr. Bruner. I love saying names. It kind of puts some physicality to this idea, abstract idea, but it was Dr. Bruner in the practical ministry department, and it was Dr. Ockholm in the theology department that kind of helped me move towards the theology department, because they saw those kind of my questions and that gift going in that direction. And so we have people who are going to help you walk alongside you towards where you want to go. In our final few minutes, I wanted to just kind of ask an open-ended question from both of you of, regardless of where these students end up, these are clearly students who are deeply interested in the Christian traditions and theology, biblical studies. In your own journeys, what would be one piece of advice you would offer students as they prepare to, enter into the theological Christian ministry, biblical studies world?
Bob, you want to start?
Wow, great question, but how to respond? Look, I would say, in some ways, building off of what Drew was saying, remain open to God, remain open to the Spirit. You may feel a subject, but then God leads you in a different direction. That certainly happened to me. I started off on a more ministerial focus and then shifted into that more academic. But you know, where I teach now as a professor, I'm doing both. I'm involved in teaching academics and also involved in ministry. And so, but it's really being open to letting God open doors at different points along your walk and remaining faithful. And I would say, especially, and it does happen, you come into college, you're being exposed to a lot of new ideas that maybe you haven't heard before, and you might find, you know, you're questioning your faith or maybe doubting. Never be afraid to approach your professor. We all are concerned about your faith, about your spiritual walk. And so never feel afraid to talk with us. We're willing to sit down with you and help you through, because we really want our students to leave enriched in their faith and to be global citizens.
A couple years ago, I was asked to speak at the baccalaureate for all APU undergrads when they were graduating. And as I thought about what I would want to say as they were ending their academic career, I said, this weekend, you're not graduating with a major, you're graduating with a ministry that just happens to have the name social work, nursing, education, theology, biblical studies, because we really do lean into that Wesleyan heritage that APU was founded in 1899, that knowledge and love of neighbor need to go hand in hand. So anyone who has been around me at APU knows how much my family, how much we're involved with foster. And it really is because of my reading of scripture. When I read the first chapter of Isaiah, or I read James chapter 1, for us, we just see that as life is not about just having a career or a job. It's about making the world around you a better place. And I would say without a doubt that whatever major you end up choosing when you come to APU is really keeping that focus that how is this making the world better? And how is this ministering to those around me? Often at times when people get focused on theology or Bible or ministry, they focus a lot on that vertical relationship between them and God, but very much that vertical and horizontal, like how is this knowledge making a difference for those around us? And a catchphrase we often say around APU is that we're trying to make difference makers. And we are just focused on School of Theology here tonight, but some of you may come and start theology and realize you want a double major. Rural studies, and say that I can partner these two together. So I would just encourage you to keep all options open, but know that if you want to come to a place that cares about your head and your heart, I mean, APU is the place for you.
Thank you both. And as a product of these departments, as a product of this university, I almost want to cover up the APU because I want to speak just as Drew and not as an APU representative when I say that APU has legitimately changed my life. If it weren't for APU, and if it weren't for God used APU and used the professors to make such an impact on my life that I will never be the same, and I'm so much better for it. And I personally believe that there are so many amazing places, so many amazing schools. And if you think APU might be that place for you, please feel free to reach out. We would love to talk to you about it. Emily actually just dropped, we just started new guided tours. So you can take a guided tour of campus, get a feel for it virtually before we're able to be back on campus. And if you want to just learn more about what APU is like, Emily will also drop our UG admissions email. Feel free to email that. We'll get you connected with an admissions counselor who our goal is not to get you to sign on the bottom line. It's not to convince you no matter what. Our goal is really to show you what APU looks like. And if this is the place God wants you, then we want to do everything we can to get you here. So one more time, I'll represent the audience and just applauding our panelists. Thank you so much, Dr. Duke, Dr. Mullen. And yeah, we will talk soon, hopefully, and I hope you all have wonderful Thanksgivings. Thanks. Bye, all.
Thank you.